All right, let's get started. Doors are closing. It's all happening. All right, so thanks for joining me here today, guys. My name is Paul Slade, and I'm the Dev Manager for the JIRA Team in Sydney. So you have to face it, really. If you don't know, you should. The JIRA Team are quite an unruly bunch. So the team is made up of the old guard and the young guns, the new young guns. The old guard, they're your reliable, seasoned campaigners. The young guns, they're trying to learn as much as possible, as quick as possible, to knock the old guys off their perch. So what's my role in this whole menagerie here? Well, I'm trying to push the old guard to step outside their comfort zone as often as possible. And I'm trying to encourage the young guns to absorb the wisdom and to challenge the status quo. I basically try and keep the team on the edge of chaos. Yet we're here to deliver the quality that you guys expect. So why are we here today? Well, besides working up a thirst for this evening's activities, I want to present to you some strategies that we use to both control and yet encourage the unruly behaviour of the JIRA team. So before we jump into strategies, just a quick history lesson in evolution. I joined a team of about 12 people back in October 2009. I took over from a guy called Anton, who many of you may well know from previous events. He and I swapped jobs. He went and managed DevTools and I came and managed JIRA. Very easy job swap, that one. And this was just after the 4.0 release. Over the last couple of years, the team has grown by almost 300%. We've welcomed Greenhopper into the fold, and we've welcomed several front-end specialists. We've welcomed designers, QA specialists, tech writers, and obviously many a Java developer. At the same time as getting bigger, we've also got faster. In the last couple of years, the time between major releases has dropped by over 100 days. These days we hover around between 3 and 4 major releases a year. And if we're getting bigger and we're getting faster, how do we ensure we keep up quality? Well, that's what these 5 techniques are about, the balance between quality and speed. So the first technique we'll talk about is all about speed. Up on the slide there, you see the view issue page, up on the left, the view issue page as it was in 3.13. And next to it is a candidate design for the view issue page that we wanted to realise in JIRA 4.1. So that's pretty much a design option for the view issue page. So how long do you think it took us to arrive at this design option? It took us an enormous 3.5 months to get there. Now obviously we're considering changes outside the view issue page here, lots of big changes going on in JIRA. We were really trying to invent a new visual language for JIRA. This effort involved a huge amount of founder time and designer time, but whatever way you cut it, 3.5 months is a very long time. Now, to make matters worse, once we got to this stage, we then had to introduce this mock-up to the development team. So it really wasn't for another month that implementation was in full swing. Now, we knew that in the coming releases of JIRA, we would have some similar visual redesigns going on. And we could not afford a 3.5 month effort every time we had to go through a visual redesign. We knew we were tackling, for example, JIRA admin UI changes in 4.4 and 4.3 that you saw today in the keynote. We needed a way to really iterate over design options much, much faster. And we needed a way to involve the dev team more, to take the dev team on the design journey. So we tried a technique called paper prototyping. Has anyone heard of paper prototyping before? A couple of people? This technique really brings the whole team together to work on a particular user interaction problem. So what are some good examples of interaction problems that we tackled with this technique? So in the JIRA admin UI, you have to make it clear to users that configuration is shared across multiple projects, and that when you change a particular piece of JIRA configuration, that you will affect multiple projects. These are examples of user interaction problems we tackled with paper prototyping. When you do paper prototyping, you team up in pairs. And those pairs or teams use cardboard, overhead projector sheets, scissors, glue, tape, pens to create a very interactive design mock-up. With those materials, it's very easy to create dialogues, pop-ups, menus, buttons, overlays, hovers, animations, anything. One important aspect of this technique, though, is that you have to time box everything. So teams get 5 minutes to create a candidate design, and then teams have a further 5 minutes to present that design to the rest of the group. It's hilarious to watch teams stealing cardboard dialogues from other teams in an attempt to enhance their mock-up in real time. The group would then critique the designs. We would pick our favourite elements and we would carry them forward to the next iteration. And we typically iterated 5 or 6 times for a particular design problem. So with this technique, we were producing designs at a great rate. They were cheap, and we had the whole team involved in the user experience design process. So here are some of the results up there. You can see that the implementation has obviously evolved from the paper prototypes, but the good thing was that the team was part of that evolution. The whole team was part of that evolution. So with this design immersion, what we noticed was developers did not have to run back to designers for every small question or for every small decision. Even the most hardened Java developer had a new appreciation for how to create an awesome user experience. Another big win was that because the developers were involved so early, many of the designs had already passed the "is this technically feasible" test very early on in their life. This was a very big win. But most importantly, we had speed. We were moving from from paper prototypes to mock-ups that actually connected to back-end live JIRA data in a matter of weeks. So if you guys have user interaction design challenges in your team, if those design tasks take a long time, or if those designs happen in a bit of a vacuum away from developers, I really recommend that you give paper prototyping a go. Now, paper prototyping was a technique that was only used by a few of the JIRA teams, so what I want to explore next is how we've changed the structure of JIRA over the last couple of years. So these two pictures demonstrate the large growth in the team over the last few years. Gone are the small, intimate sessions in the bar. We're actually bigger now than the 2010 picture indicates. Does anyone know what this picture's all about? Has anyone heard of a guy called Josh Skinner? So he's the guy we are cheersing in the photo. So if you want to know the story, come and grab me in the decompression room after all the beer or a beer tonight, and I'll tell you the story. When we were smaller, obviously being centralised made a lot more sense. Communication overheads were lower, decision-making was more consistent. But as we were growing, centralised decision-making was really slowing us down. Also in the past, in JIRA, teams tended to form around features. And so that meant that teams typically only existed for a release. This was way too much structural change as we grew. It lowered team cohesion and it really slowed us down. So obviously we needed to change, but what was the right team shape? What I want to do is look at some of our teams, look at the forces that shaped them, and then look at some of the characteristics they have in common. The first two teams are the Ignite team and the A team. These two teams are composed mainly of front-end specialists, so JavaScript developers and HTML, CSS guys, and Java all-rounders. These guys are our keen paper prototypers. And so inside Atlassian, they're sort of affectionately referred to as the colouring in teams. So when creating these teams, we made a conscious decision not to lump all our front-end specialists together. We wanted to bring front-enders and Java devs as close together as possible to get knowledge sharing and skills exchange. We've had some good results from this. So front-enders now can pretty much fix any Java tests they need to. And Java devs, on the other hand, they can create well-designed JavaScript and they can diagnose most CSS problems. So these teams work on features to do with the JIRA user interface. So view issue, issue navigator, some of the dialogues and the admin UI work. These teams owe their existence to our increased investment in the JIRA user interface. These are teams that are an example of where structure follows product themes. In contrast to the two colouring in teams, the Dream Team and the Engine Room team exist because of where JIRA is on its maturity curve. The Dream Team exists to evolve existing features and to tackle some of the requests that you guys raise on jira.atlassian.com. The Dream Team are your classic generalists. They have all the skills required to deliver features end to end, and they have a deep knowledge of JIRA's business rules. They are our JIRA historians. The Engine Room team, on the other hand, they implement new architectural services, keep the common components up to date. They work on performance and scalability. They work on evolving our API and the general health of the JIRA code base. For the last year, the Engine Room team's been delivering features like embedded crowd and most recently user time zone support, thankfully, eventually. Yes, you should applaud. But basically, really, those teams do exist more as a response to our complex code base. So, in your quest for speed, your teams may be organised a little differently. But let's look at what our teams have in common. And I think these are the things that make them successful. Our teams are very autonomous. They own their own backlog. We've decentralised technical and prioritisation decisions as much as we can. We have team leads who have taken on people management responsibility. This is our scalable approach to ensuring we keep people happy. Now, as you would expect, we've moved some of our really good people into team lead positions. It took time for them to adjust to coding less. And they would always ask me, how much can I code? The guideline we came up with together was that you basically cannot commit to stories in the current iteration. You cannot put yourself on critical path. This is basically in recognition of your team and execution of your sprint comes first, comes ahead of your coding. Now this led to the emergence of something we call Black Ops. This is basically team leads tackling work that is not time critical, and while that work is in progress, it doesn't prevent us from shipping JIRA. Many support requests are implemented as Black Ops. A classic example from 4.4 is exposing all our SOAP services via JSON RPC. Our teams act more accountable now. The teams trust each other, they really watch each other's back, and they're far more cohesive than they used to be. Teams instinctively understand their own strengths and weaknesses. Teams are very self-organising. They can tailor their own development process as they see fit, but most of them run a variant of Scrum. So what we have then, we think, is a structure that we can use as we scale and continue to grow the JIRA team. So here are a couple of characteristics that I think you guys can take away that are important about our teams. So don't centralise too long. It will eventually slow you down. And you can change your teams, but don't change them too often. It lowers cohesion and slows you down. Obviously, autonomous teams can run much faster. So we've got small teams running fast. And I imagine it's a challenge for you guys, just as it is for us, that it is difficult to regularly meet your sprint commitments while keeping up quality. So let's look at how we deal with QA in the JIRA team. Whoop. Okay. So, prior to the 4.0 release, for the few years prior to 4.0, it's probably fair to say that our focus on user experience was a little lacking. We were really busy making JIRA a feature-rich issue tracker. This was resulting in the UX becoming a bit more complex and in some ways inaccessible to all but the most frequent user. With JIRA 4.0 and JIRA 4.1, we really got the UX theme rolling. Now, to implement the view issue changes you saw back in the paper prototyping section, we had to deal with a lot of technical debt in our front-end code. And we had to battle cross-browser variability that previously we had never been impacted by. So obviously we were in 4.1, we were quite cautious. And I think if you've seen 4.1, you may notice that caution. Our changes weren't that far-reaching. What we tackled in 4.1 though, we tested thoroughly. And this is with the help of our expanded QA team. So during 4.1, our QA team went from 1 person to 2. At the end of 4.1 then, we thought the JIRA user experience quality bar had been raised significantly. We had the whole team determined to make any JIRA UI changes as polished as possible. So let's then enter into the 4.2 release. Teams had grown by that time. We were far more ambitious about our UX features. Consequently, there was a lot more work in progress. More stories were being pushed through to this massive 2-person QA team. QA, strangely enough, were getting further behind. Bugs were being raised, but they were being raised for old stories. The dev team, on the other hand, were excited about how the 4.2 features were shaping up, and they were pushing ahead with new feature work. So we had QA testing as hard as they could. We had a dev team excited to do more features. Bugs were being raised, but they weren't being fixed. The bug pile was growing. We had the perfect storm. So by the middle of 4.2, we were pushing a huge bug pile ahead of us. When we thought we were approaching the end of 4.2, in reality, we were approaching the middle. So after we'd done 14 weeks of feature development, what followed was 14 weeks of bug fix and polish. We had clearly let things get out of control. All the small issues were adding up to an overall crappy user experience, and nobody wanted that. We used techniques like wallboards to help us track the number of bugs we had left for the release. We had crazy spreadsheets that were tracking incoming and outgoing bug rates, and this was all in an attempt to predict a release date. Frankly, it was a frustrating and painful period. We definitely needed to change something. So what we needed a force to stop us doing new story work. We needed some back pressure. Bugs clearly are a natural back pressure, but our bugs weren't being raised quickly enough, and they were being raised against old stories. Obviously, there were not enough people doing what our QA specialists were doing. We needed to distribute testing a little more. So starting with the 4.3 release, we added a new role. We called it the DOT, the Developer on Test. So this sounds all easy, right? So we already have this quality review step in our workflow. So all we need to do is get a developer that was different from the original developer that did the work to pick up the issue when it reached that quality review step and to perform the manual quality testing. Sounds easy? Not so much. Developers were obviously hesitant to do this testing to leave their new shiny feature work. We needed a way to take the emotion out of making the decision to do some dotting. We needed a constraint on the system. So what we did was we borrowed from some of the success we had had using Kanban for our bug fix or maintenance work. And we put a limit on the number of issues that can be waiting for quality review at any time. From this, we had some immediate results. The developers were far less emotional about dotting. We had a sharp drop in the number of open bugs. We had less stories rejected downstream by QA. Our QA specialists, all 2 of them, did far less testing. They actually did more coaching and helping sharing tools and test data with the development team. We had no more crazy spreadsheets. We had far more predictability. So our story velocity did go down, but this was okay because our previous velocity was really an illusion. Teams really started meeting their sprint commitments. The product was shippable at the end of each iteration. Things became more predictable and team motivation went right up. So this is now the mantra in the JIRA team. Quality matters for an awesome user experience. You have to fix all the small bugs. And more importantly, quality is everyone's responsibility. So we had teams that were really meeting their sprint commitments regularly. And we were getting much better then at adding new features to JIRA. New features means more tests. I don't know if anyone was in Bryce's QA CI presentation earlier, but we have a lot of tests. More tests means a bigger build. Let's look at how we dealt with that particular challenge. So we've done a quality topic. Now let's switch back to speed again. And I want to talk a little bit about developer effectiveness. With the last topic, all that talk of manual QA, of dotting, you'd be forgiven for thinking that manual testing is all we do. That's not true. In JIRA, we have unit tests, functional tests, Selenium 1, Selenium 2 tests, JavaScript unit tests, performance tests, tested platform matrix tests. We have tests coming out the wazoo. And we're constantly battling to keep our CI loop as tight as possible, to drive that CI feedback time down. Currently, we sit between 40 and 50 minutes for our CI loop, and that is way too slow. This is slowing us down big time. We have a large code base, obviously, and we use Maven 2 to manage our dependencies. And when you combine these two, you're stretching your IDE to its limits. Too much IDE scanning and re-indexing for the developers is a big thing that slows us down. These are two examples of things that significantly impact our developer effectiveness. I'm sure you guys have some similar struggles out there. So for us, something called DevSpeed, or the DevSpeed Sprint, is a chance for the team to fight back. It's like a grease and oil change that we do at the end of each release. It presents a great opportunity for devs to refactor that ugly bit of code or fix that flaky test. Devs can clean house and set the table in preparation for the next release. DevSpeed is very motivational as well for the team. It gives them some variety, gives them a chance to fix the things that really piss them off. We play Scrum we play the Scrum game with DevSpeed, like we do with all our development work, and we manage obviously the backlog in Greenhopper. What we do is we choose a different developer each iteration to plan and prioritise DevSpeed. This is a great chance for different devs to flex their Scrum Master muscles. So if you guys are thinking of starting a DevSpeed program where you work, just make sure it is easy for devs to capture their hassles. You need to collect a lot of data to ensure you're working on the right problems. And let your team get into a regular rhythm of defragging their processes and tools. So we've spent a lot of time now talking about team-level tactics. We want to make sure that we allow individuals to still be surprisingly awesome. So the final topic for today I see is the ultimate accelerator. It's a process that's been in Atlassian for a couple of years, and it's where developers use all their product knowledge and their customer context gained from techniques like paper prototyping. It's where developers are brave enough to tackle big projects because they have an effective toolset and development environment around them. This is obviously courtesy of initiatives like DevSpeed. It's where developers choose what they want to do, from scratching a technical itch adding a new feature to an existing product or coming up with the next big thing. The prioritisation and decision-making skills they learn in their tight teams help devs choose the right project. At Atlassian, much like any other place, and many other places, this technique is called 20% time. Hands up who has an equivalent of 20% time where they work. So, a couple of people. So if you do, you'll know that it's challenging to get it to work effectively. If you don't, I want to give you some tips, some lessons learned from our implementation of 20%. So remember, in 20% time, devs can spend 1 day a week, or 20% of their time basically, working on a project of their choosing. So it sounds awesome, right? So think of the speed of delivery here. You have a huge number of projects going on across your organisation, and you have new features regularly dropping into products, finding their way out to customers, and you have the odd new product popping up too. But does it really work that way? So in Atlassian, given the investment we have in 20% time, in my opinion, it's not working well enough. So for a start, obviously, it's not really 20% time. I think we've done several studies on how much time people spend on 20% time. It's more like 8 to 10%. And this is really due to the pressure to create feature-rich releases. But the oddity here is that 20% time is meant to help that. Projects also are generally not that ambitious. The number of weird things, crazy left field things we see people trying is quite low. Projects are also typically solo ventures. Worst of all, projects stall at about 80% complete. They're never done enough to be included in the product. Instead, they get retired. Not the developers, the projects. They get retired, and the developer moves on to something new. This is an absolute killer. All this potential to increase speed, all this developer motivation and inspiration, all this blood, sweat and tears is being wasted. The worst outcome is that developers, they lose faith in the 20% process. They stop dreaming up those new projects, those new ideas, and they stop participating. So I don't know if you guys have encountered this too in your efforts to start 20%. So what did we do about this in the JIRA team? So really our focus has been very simple. It's all about delivery. It's all about shipping 20% projects to customers. The first thing we had to do was raise the visibility of 20% projects. They were happening very much in a vacuum. How we did this was that it was mandatory for all developers who spent time on 20% to demo their work during the end of iteration demo showcase, alongside all the other story work we'd done in that iteration. Next, what happened during these demos actually was that people's projects were being vetted by the crowd. There was a certain amount of peer group pressure at play here. People were pressured to actually show progress, and there was a little bit of pressure to work on worthwhile things. What was good, what we really noticed, was that it didn't require me, the managerial hand to step in. It didn't require any input from product management. The developers themselves were actually able to sort out the right projects from just technical philandering. Next, everyone needs a plan to get their project into trunk. And every demo session, you need to explain the work remaining before your project can go into trunk. If you're working on a plugin as your 20% project, which we do encourage, we love plugins. If you're working on a plugin, then you need to explain to everyone what versions of JIRA that plugin will run on And if that plugin only runs on an unreleased version of JIRA, you have to have a pretty good reason for that. Finally, projects have to have, and this is the most important bit for us, projects have to have a soft landing when they hit trunk. So what do I mean by that? I mean that they have to shift from being a solo venture to being a feature that is adopted by the whole team. They need to go through the same dotting, the same testing, and the same polish that every other feature does. It's early days for us in implementing these changes, but we've already seen a significant number of 20% projects being shipped. So some examples from 4.4. I don't know how many of you guys get JIRA notifications via email and use the HTML email template. So in 4.4, we had one developer in the team hated the way the HTML emails looked on his iPhone. That was his way of consuming the activity of the team. He would sit on the train with his iPhone. So he basically redid single-handedly all the email templates in JIRA, and so they now look awesome on mobile phones. And it actually prompted a lot of HTML email rewriting in a lot of the other products. So now in the latest release of most products, you see a nice consistency of HTML emails across all our products, which is great. So while he started that effort on his own, it was a team effort that got it across the line and got it into trunk. He used the services of someone else to actually schedule the remaining work and dish that work out to people across the team. Another example of a 20% project that's shipping in 4.4 is editable custom field options. This has been a long-standing feature request, and one of the guys in the engine room team was frustrated that he couldn't get it to work. So he set about solving this problem on his own, but again, it had to shift to a team-owned feature to get it across the line. The team spent a lot of time blitzing this feature to make sure that it didn't disrupt any other parts of JIRA. Recently, well, I think as a signal of how successful 20% work is happening in the JIRA team, is we've found that recently product managers are no longer putting all the stories they want on the backlog. Instead, they're making backroom deals with developers, slowly but surely guiding their 20% projects in the right direction. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this recent evolution. So if you guys are starting a 20% program in your organisations, I think the main thing to remember is that visibility of projects and working as a team is the key to getting this work shippable. So let's wrap it up. We've talked about a lot of stuff today. I think all these things have an underlying theme of the balance between quality and speed. We've talked about how paper prototyping gets us from a desire to improve the user experience through mock-ups to implementation much faster. We've talked about how tight autonomous teams really speed you up. We've talked about scaling QA and making it everyone's responsibility. We've talked about making time for developers to eliminate their hassles. Let them make their inner loop as fast as possible. And finally, we've talked about how to make 20% time effective. We've talked about how it takes the organisation or the team to match the efforts of the individual. If I had to summarise the JIRA team's development ethos for you, it would really be to trust your instincts, to be crisp and courageous in every decision that you make, and to strive to surprise customers as often as you can with JIRA's awesomeness. Thanks very much. You can put that.
Great, thank you. That was awesome. So we have a few minutes for Q&A, so you can't leave.
That's it. Go.
I guarantee you there's a few people that have questions here for you. So if you have, just raise your hand and I'll come find you with a mic.
One of the things you talked about was decentralizing the, I guess, decision-making progress to make autonomous groups. And I guess it sounds great, but I'm kind of curious how you go about doing that when it's really the founders or some of the higher-ranking people who traditionally would make those decisions. How do you pass that off?
Right. Yeah, Mike was here. I think he's gone now. Now, I will use Mike's analogy, right? So he talks about different classes of decision. He talks about trunk decisions, branch decisions, and leaf decisions, right? So trunk decisions really are high-level decisions that guide large investment in across the organisation. Obviously, the founders play a large role in that, right? And then moving down to smaller decisions is those branch and leaf decisions that you leave the team to make, right? There's so many more of them that if you tried to get involved in all of them, you'd slow right down. So really, it's the different class of decision making that allows us to decentralise the branch and leaf decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I'm secretly upset that you found out my trick to get features into the product.
Yeah, I know.
So, Paul, you talked about crazy spreadsheets, crazy graphs.
Yes.
So why is it so crazy to want to know the rates of bugs being created and the bugs being solved?
So maybe crazy is a bit too much of an emotional word for it. I guess what annoyed me was the level of energy I had to devote to keeping these spreadsheets up to date, right? And the fact that it felt a little artificial to me that we were trying to be pinpoint accurate with release date when really there is so much variability involved in software development. It was it was a situation that was so different to previous JIRA releases where we were, well, different to the release, how the releases should work, right? Where you actually keep the thing much tighter and you keep it shippable much more along the way. Right, so the situation we had was we had to use so many different and odd and energy-sapping techniques because we'd let the release get too much out of control. That's what we didn't like.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with, spreadsheets and information radiators. We have them all over the place. It was just that I felt we were tracking things in an unnatural way.
So like an opportunity to put that tracking inside JIRA directly instead of spreadsheets.
Yeah. I don't think it was the spreadsheet so much that was the problem. It was more that we were tracking information different to how we'd done it before. It hadn't been necessary to dive down to that level of detail before, but all of a sudden it was because we were dealing with such a huge pile of things.
A question about your 20% time. So we did something like that, and we said, okay, let's do it for 2 days out of the week, and then people ended up spending all week on it, 10 hours a day. So it was kind of the opposite problem. So I'm kind of curious, what kind of strategies would you use to ensure that that project does get done, but I guess in your case doesn't take enough time, and in other cases might take too much time? How do you contrast that with other commitments for the release?
So again, we follow the theme of decentralisation. Basically, each sub-team decides when they do 20%. Well, the first thing we noticed was that originally individuals would decide, and the problem with that was it was very disruptive to the mechanics of the team. If you've got one person out doing 20%, 4 people doing their normal feature work, that person is essentially off limits. And if they're a key front-end developer, for example, a key resource in the team, it just doesn't work. So first of all, teams agreed to do their 20% time on a particular day. That was step one. And then we found that, so this was members of a team agreeing, a single team agreeing on a day. Then we found that actually groups of teams started to agree on a single day. And then we found that the context switching of just doing it one day a week it actually reduced the effectiveness of 20% time for them. So what we started doing is people would batch the 2 days together. So they may do 20% time at the end of one iteration or in the gap between 2 iterations or 2 sprints, for example. We haven't had a situation yet where people have needed to take a large chunk of time. I think what happens is that the features, they land in trunk before they land in trunk and then essentially, as I said, they become a whole team feature, and then you get quite a lot of progress on them because you have quite a few people working on them in an attempt to get them shippable.
Anybody else? We got time for maybe one or two more? No one? All right. Oh, what? You already got one. You don't? Oh, okay.
How did the limit on only 5 items awaiting for QA really impact your sprint planning after you put that process in place?
So it didn't necessarily impact our sprint planning directly, but what it did was throttle our velocity, right? So we would notice that only because we had that limit in place and because there couldn't be too many, developers couldn't keep taking on new stories, we ended up getting to a realistic number of stories we can regularly complete in an iteration. And just having that number at our disposal helped us in future planning, right? So we just used it as a realistic velocity measure. I can't emphasise enough how something simple like that fundamentally changed how we were doing development. It was just the fact that it just forced a distribution of the testing effort around the team. It was a good thing.
And so is that what you've ended up with, having just like two QA sort of coordinators?
So now what we actually have is one. We had 2, and 1 got stolen because she is unreal. She was stolen for another team, and so at the moment we are surviving with 1 QA person and about 28 developers.
Wow.
So it really is. So it's important to realise that the bulk of JIRA's testing effort is automated. All right. The type of testing we're talking about here is more exploratory testing. It's actually 2 parts: exploratory testing and for new work, and verification testing for bug fixing, to make sure that bug is actually fixed. They're the 2 classes of manual testing we do. And with the exploratory testing, I guess the real win is that people are learning, and this is where the coaching from the QA person comes in. People are learning how to test around changes, how to actually explore effectively how that feature works with the rest of the application. Are there any unintended consequences? Is it consistent from a user experience perspective? All those skills the developers are learning.
How many week sprints do you use, and what's the time between when a sprint ends and your next sprint begins?
So we have 2-week sprints, and we don't have any time between sprints. We run. What's a good strategy we found is to run from a Wednesday to a Wednesday, because normally you will tie releases of either milestone builds or final builds up with the end of a sprint. And so if you do that on a Wednesday, there is a time before the end of the week for various deployment and release mechanics to happen.
Don't forget to do a survey, and I'll see you in 30 minutes. Talk to Paul here if you got more. Thank you.